Good afternoon, welcome to the UK Column News. It is the 12th of March 2014 and it's just gone 1 o'clock. Myself, Louise Collins, Brian Gerrish and Mike Romsau here in Plymouth. And we have Mark Anderson from American Free Press over in the States joining us today. Beautiful day.
Yeah, wonderful day. It's getting a bit unnerving, so roughly blue sky, a bit silked out by whatever it is that's appearing up there these days, and temperature's quite reasonable, lots of daffodils out, and people are smiling, which is really brilliant.
Yeah.
So we're going to crack straight on. I think Mike's going to be talking about Ukraine, very serious situation. We know Mark Anderson wants to cover some of that area as well. Mike.
Yes, right. So the situation continues to escalate. So the US is now deploying AWACS airborne surveillance aircraft to Poland. They've been having, well, allegedly a monitoring range of up to 400 kilometres, whatever that is in real money, 300 miles or so, and they're coming from Germany. And they're also going to be joined by British AWACS aircraft from RAF Waddington. As well as that, there are going to be a dozen F-16 fighter jets. They've already begun air exercises in Polish airspace. The USS Truxtun is there, participating in exercises in the Black Sea with the Bulgarian and Romanian navies. Last week, in fact, 6 F-15 fighters and a KC-135 refueling aircraft, as well as another 4 F-15s that were already there, are operating in the Baltic countries. Also, the aircraft carrier USS George H.W. Bush is on a port visit to Turkey. There are 4 other destroyers, a cruiser, a frigate, in or around the Mediterranean, as well as amphibious ready group of 3 ships carrying 2,000 Marines. That's an escalating situation. Mark, what do you think of what's going on?
Well, once again, America is projecting this idea of its exceptionalism. That is that it is the harbinger of democracy across the globe, and Russia could be nothing other than a bully tyrant. But facts be told, and I'm sure you guys can bear this out, the toppling of the government in Kiev had some backing by the EU and NATO, at least sort of an indirect backing. And so the West really helped topple the government in Kiev, and now is escalating its military activities. And there is word on the ground that a lot of the protests in Kiev were trumped up and had help, you might say. So there's a lot of manipulation going on by the West, which of course plays the moral high ground. So yes, indeed, it's a very troubling situation. This military escalation is completely unnecessary. Vladimir Putin, whatever his faults, has some legitimate reasons for what he's doing in the Crimea. So it bears watching, but it does look troubling at this time.
Can I just add into that, Mark, that of course bringing AWACS-type aircraft right up to the Russian border is an unbelievably aggressive act by Britain and America, because of course the surveillance capability is extending, as Mike said, hundreds of miles into Russian territory. And aside from the surveillance, you've also got the electronic warfare capability. So this, on a scale of aggression, this is a highly aggressive act being carried out at the moment by Western powers. What would we be saying if the Russians were moving those sorts of units into Ireland, if we're talking in terms of the UK, and we know that basically large chunks of British air defence territory was under direct threat from Russian aircraft. Of course, the press would be screaming and howling, but here we see clearly aggressive military moves by the West, and we're still being fed this propaganda line, particularly, I've got to say, Mark, from the BBC, that all the trouble has stemmed from Putin and Russia.
Yes, very true.
Yeah, well, Well, just see where it leads us. Sorry,
well,
you've got some more here.
Yes, indeed. So Ukrainian military also coming on alert. Now, it's interesting you mentioned the BBC, Brian, because this morning they were really excited about the idea that these F-16s in Poland would end up being or having nuclear-tipped weapons attached to them, and also the possibility of more nuclear or larger nuclear arsenal being moved into Poland from the United States. So increasingly dangerous situation. But I wanted to highlight this website here, which is called iacenter.org, originally established by Ramsey Clark, erstwhile member of the US administration. But I just wanted to read some of the points that they're making here, because they're saying corporate media has always lied about the reasons for war, from Vietnam to Iraq to Libya and Syria. If you turn on CNN or Fox News, read the New York Times or listen to NPR, you aren't getting the real story. You're getting 10 things the US corporate media won't tell you about what's happening in Ukraine. So they just list the 10 things. The first thing they say is Washington planned the coup in Ukraine, and they highlight the issue of US State Department official Victoria Nuland and the fact that she had been caught on tape. Well, they say plotting who would be the next head of the Ukraine. Then they say there has been no Russian invasion, and they're saying that Washington officials have threatened Russia for invading the Ukraine. This is a big lie meant to cover up the US involvement in the coup, and they talk about the Russian military bases in the Crimea. Then they go on to point out the US war buildup, the fact that the Navy has destroyed the has deployed the USS Truxtun, F-15s, F-16s, the stuff that we've just mentioned. Then they point out that actually the people that are dominating the new government are neo-Nazis with a long-standing historical link to right back to the Second World War. They're also pointing out that coup leaders apparently have hired snipers to justify their takeover. They highlight Wall Street and big oil wanting to control Ukraine for geopolitical reasons, linked to oil and gas and so on. They then point out NATO's drive to expand. They talk about the money that we were talking about yesterday going into Ukraine, supporting the Ukrainian banks. And they're then pointing out the fact that, in fact, if there was any criticism, there was a lot of propaganda in the media in the last few weeks regarding the fact that the previous administration had been sort of spending lots of money on themselves. They're pointing out that, in fact, nothing has changed there. This is still power for the 1% and misery for everybody else. And finally, they're pointing out that people across Ukraine are, in fact, not standing by and accepting this. And I'll just read what it says here. It says, people in eastern Ukraine and throughout the country are organising against the coup. Some have taken over regional and city buildings and refused to hand them over to the new authorities. Others are marching on military bases and demanding the troops not obey the commands of the neo-Nazis in Kiev. Some are calling for the Russian government to protect and assist them, while the people of Ukraine remember what the Nazi rule was like during the Second World War, and they will not stand for it again. And just before we end on this subject, I'll just point out Wicked Willie here, because he's talking about Crimea's parliamentary vote yesterday, which voted overwhelmingly for adopting a declaration of independence from the Ukraine. This is just the peninsula of Crimea itself. And they're going to hold a referendum on Sunday. And lo and behold, the bastions of democracy in the EU and the West and NATO are saying that this is an undemocratic thing and that they can't hold a referendum, that the referendum's illegal under the Ukrainian constitution. But of course, that Ukrainian constitution has only been established as a result of a coup, which itself was arguably illegal. The Hague here is quoting the OSCE chairman, that's the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and yesterday he said, in its current form, the referendum regarding Crimea, scheduled for March the 16th, 2014, is in contradiction with the Ukrainian constitution and must be considered illegal. And he said, for any referendum regarding the degree of autonomy or sovereignty of the Crimea to be legitimate, it would need to be based on the Ukrainian constitution and have to be in line with international law. And sorry, William, if you're going to say that you support that idea, I'm simply going to call you a hypocritical traitor, because in fact Britain's views over membership of the European Union and our relationship between the EU and the British Constitution are also unlawful. So to suggest that Crimea is breaking the law by holding a referendum about whether to be in or out of a democracy or an organisation that it doesn't agree with, that seems pretty clearly hypocritical, doesn't it?
Yes, definitely.
It certainly does. And the other thing, of course, we've got that wonderful OSCE document where the front page is red and it simply has common purpose stamped across the front of it. So if viewers and listeners have not come across OSCE before, get onto Google and start to have a look at who's involved and what discussions are taking place. And you will find an organisation which has been working covertly in the background to decide what the whole political and military and security structure of the European Union is to be. And of course, that is why we've got the present problems at the moment, as Britain is being dismantled by David Cameron and William Hague, of course, and others, being dismantled as a nation state in order to be subsumed into this beast of the European Union.
It's certainly got the chat room chatting, all in agreement with what Mike is saying. Fewer stronger words than hypocritical traitor, but it's certainly a talking point in the UK Column Forum.
Well, my minimum point on this, without just getting too deep into it, is these politicians who at the moment cannot run Britain. We've got the country falling apart. We can't feed people. We haven't got jobs. The transport system's falling apart. The roads are falling apart. The hospitals are falling apart. And we've got William Hague going overseas, telling the Ukraine, telling the Russians how to run their countries. These people are so unbelievably dangerous because, of course, he's got confidence in himself.
He's almost as bad as Blair.
We'll hand over to you, Mark. What do you feel about this situation?
Well, certainly the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, has become a very troublesome entity. I covered a NATO summit in Chicago, May 2012, and I've taken a lot harder look at NATO since then. It's the real world hegemon right now, inasmuch as NATO will look at Russia and say Russia's being expansionist or being a bully. The real bully really is NATO, and NATO has long dropped its original defensive posture to defend Western Europe against the Warsaw Pact. NATO is on the offensive and has been for quite some time now. And so this is something to really watch, where NATO sheds its former defensive mode and now goes into offensive mode. It is the one that wants to absorb nations in Eastern Europe. It is the entity that's expansionist, not Russia. And of course, NATO and the European Union go hand in hand. And it seems that they fostered this coup in Ukraine in one way or another, and Mike outlined a lot of that very well. And so we have to really take a look at NATO. We have to question membership in NATO of the United States and Britain. It would really be a good idea to get out of that organization. It's laudable that Switzerland never joined it in the first place, and we can all hope that that maintains. But I think that the North Atlantic Treaty Organization is really showing its true colors. It's being an expansionist organization. It's sort of the merchant marine for big money and big oil. And we need to really take a hard look at national policy on a nation-by-nation basis and look at the ultimate dismantling of NATO and not the dismantling of individual nation states.
Well, I'd certainly agree with that, Mark. And of course, I feel particularly motivated on this subject as somebody who spent 21 years in the military during the Cold War period. For me, as a Navy officer, you spend a lot of time in a metal box, and so the information that comes into that steel box is the information you have to work with and believe in. And of course, what we're now seeing is that we have been told a complete and utter pack of lies over the true state of the world. And I couldn't agree more that it's obvious that NATO has been ramped up as a highly aggressive organisation, which is now flexing its muscles, not at distance to the to Russia, but right up to the Russian borders, and the fact that we've now got the Western press ramping up trouble by starting to talk about tactical nuclear weapons. This is an extremely dangerous situation, and we've seen the recent revelations about snipers used to kill both sides in the Ukraine, obviously to ramp up the violence and increase the fear and suspicion against the population. And I don't think there's no doubt in my mind that those snipers have come from the West and been deployed with Western money, which probably brings us on very nicely to the fact that, of course, even NATO is simply an organisational vehicle, and who's really causing the trouble? It's got to come down to money.
Yeah, well, yesterday, Mark Carney, who's the is the governor of the Bank of England, of course, was in front of the Treasury Select Committee, and he spent most of the day there. I didn't get a chance to watch it all. I watched some of it, but really, they didn't really give him too hard a time as usual. However, they did discuss the foreign exchange scandal that we've covered over the last couple of months. Actually, we've mentioned it on a number of occasions, and this is potentially an even bigger banking fraud than LIBOR, where in fact, and it goes right into the heart of the Bank of England itself, because they've already suspended a member of staff for being involved in this fraud, allegedly. So yesterday he promised what he was calling a relentless investigation into allegations that foreign exchange rates had been rigged. He admitted that the allegations were, quote, as serious as LIBOR, if not more so. But he absolutely refused to accept that the Bank of England had been warned about this a number of years ago. The Telegraph is quoting 8 years ago. I believe that the bank had been warned, but he's denying it. He revealed that they are about to appoint a new deputy governor responsible for markets and banking. And the first task of this new director will be to, quote, conduct a root and branch review of how the bank conducts market intelligence. No mention, of course, of criminal investigations or any such thing. So this is going to be another cover up in the sense that various bankers are not going to be. I'm sure they'll throw a few sacrifices to the wall, but they won't. Nothing significant is going to change once again.
Any comments in there, Mark? I know you're going to tell us a little bit about the Fed in a minute. We've got a couple more points to make on Mr. Carnage, but anything you want to come in straight away with?
You know, I've long suspected that Bernie Madoff, who's become the poster boy of banking corruption here in the States, was one of these sacrificial moves. That is, well, here's a bad banker here. They hold him out. They trot him out. They say, isn't he a bad boy? And they use him as an example. However, Bernie Madoff, for all his sins and foibles, is really kind of a small or medium-time player at best. There are far worse things that are never even heard of, let alone prosecuted, in the West, in the United States, and of course in your country. Banking scandals run the gamut, and they go far deeper than the Bernie Madoffs of the world. So, yeah, there's a lot of this fakery going on, a lot of this misrepresentation. But the real things that the bankers hide are much more of an elemental nature, you might say. The fundamental things that go on behind the curtain in the private banking world, that's where the real crime happens. Individual crimes are noteworthy, of course, but the real crime is privatized central banking itself. And of course, I'll go into that when you want me to, a little bit about the Fed audit and related matters.
Thank you.
Right, okay. Well, we just come back to Mr. Carnage, as Mike likes to call him, and just a simple look at this man. But here he is. We're talking about interest rate rises. So, of course, there's a big grin on his face, because although he's saying it's going to be gradual, what he means is a gradual turning of the screw, gradual movement towards people losing their houses.
Sorry. one of the things that amused me yesterday was actually he hadn't done his tie up properly in front of as he was meeting the MPs, and I kind of thought, yeah, you check yours there, Brian. And that's pretty clear in that photograph, actually.
Thanks for that. Thanks
well,
for that, Mike.
it's the sloppy arrogance of the rich, isn't it? He's probably got a suit that costs £2,000, so if you can afford a sloppy tie, that's okay.
Let's give Mike a little fashion slot.
I just had a few comments. If you can pop Mr. Carnage back up on the screen. I hope this guy's right. I believe he's a Canadian. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's all right. So let's just have a think about this man who is so powerful at the moment. So he's a Canadian. He's not even British. He's been introduced into the position. He's now dictating to us as a nation state what is going to happen with our financial system, who's going to lose their houses, who's going to have a job. Who is this man, and how exactly did he get there? But we're going to say he's not British. He's appointed, he's not elected, and yet he is dictating what's happening in the country. His only allegiance is to bankers and the banking system. So is there any independence? Absolutely not. Who pays his salary? The very people he's protecting.
The gods of money.
And I suspect, I'll give him, maybe he's had to get that suit out of a charity shop. Actually, it doesn't fit that well. It's not £2,000. But he's so wealthy, he's going to be unaffected by the measures he introduces. He's making decisions that can't even be debated on the floor of Parliament. We know that you can't talk about the Bank of England in the House. Well, that'd be taboo, wouldn't it, to be talking about how our nation's money is controlled. He's preparing to increase interest rates. Well, what's that going to do? It's going to generate more profit for the bankers.
Can I just say it's getting more and more apparent each day that more and more power is being given to individuals nowadays. They have this power. This man has the power of money. We're going to be coming onto a story shortly with regards to Jeremy Hunt. More and more powers are being given to one person to control the lives of people, and it's quite worrying.
This is the top 1% at the top of the power pyramid. I just want to make one last point on that one, Mike, if you'll bring Mr. Carnage back. He's the man perpetuating now the lie of money created from nothing. This is the whole stem of it. How are these people manipulating politicians, nation states, huge corporations by their power over money, which they created from nothing in the first place? This is a massive fraud. Mike?
Yeah, well, actually, one of the subjects that he was being questioned on yesterday was, of course, quantitative easing and how Britain is going to get itself out of the quantitative easing policy. And he didn't really have very many answers for that. But what he did absolutely demonstrate was that his first priority with regard to getting Britain out of the quantitative easing policy was to keep the markets happy first. So it's not about what's good for the country; it's only what's good for the markets, and that's really only his consideration. And you know, as regards any kind of accountability that there is for this man, as we know, his only real accountability is that if inflation is ever above the 2% target, he has to write a letter to George Osborne, and that's really about it. There's no danger to his job. He's not going to get a slap on the wrist. He's not going to lose his bonus. He has to write a letter
to George Osborne.
Yeah.
Probably get a cuddle. Well, we won't dwell on this one, but here he is again. And, of course, now he's into deep politics, constitutional politics, where he's warning over, I think this article is saying that basically if Alex Salmond pushes for Scottish independence as a vassal state of the EU, that RBS would have to move. And there's a lot of talk about banks moving south of the border. So he isn't just a Canadian over here, overpaid and too involved in financial matters. We're now seeing this man getting involved in politics. So we'll give you a free hand here, Mark. This is your article from American Free Press about the Fed chairman angrily rejecting central bank audit.
Yes, that's a very interesting story. I'll preface commenting on that by noting that when Janet Yellen was sworn in, take note of this. This is very interesting. When she was sworn in, a government official neither a judge nor any kind of other government official swore her in. Daniel K. Torello, another banker, swore in Janet Yellen as head of the Fed. Now, digest that for a moment. We didn't have a Supreme Court justice. We didn't have any kind of magistrate of the United States. We had another banker swearing in Yellen to take over for Bernanke as head of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. I don't see where the official stamp of the sovereign government is involved there at all. The Fed only issued a press release. There was no real ceremony to issue in the head of at least the United States powerful central bank. It may be more powerful than the Bank of England in a way. Maybe they're on par with each other. But one banker officially swore in another banker. And I don't even know if she took an oath to defend and uphold the U.S. Constitution. What does a banker take an oath to uphold and defend? I mean, the whole thing is comically tragic and very troubling. That being said, when Janet Yellen, now the head of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve, when she appeared before the House Banking Committee, and that's the article that I wrote that you're referring to, when they got onto the subject of a couple of bills that are languishing in Congress about auditing the Fed, she became noticeably irritable and defensive. And that's because they don't want you looking behind the curtain. Put the Bernie Madoffs aside, put these different banking scandals aside. Forget for a moment that bankers, younger bankers at least, are jumping off the tops of buildings, and look at the actual machinations of these bankers. And then you see the real crime is privatized central banking itself. And when Yellen was questioned about these things, she got very indignant and tried to kind of mask that, and went on to say that there's no way in hell, in her own words, kind of more subtly put, there's no way in hell that she's going to allow a full and true government audit, top to bottom, A to Z, of the Fed. Moreover, she made it clear that the real holy grail of Federal Reserve operations, the creation of money, the policy and terms under which money comes into existence, that is off limits and will remain off limits. And that, of course, is done through the Federal Open Market Committee meetings of the Federal Reserve. The president cannot attend those meetings, and members of Congress cannot attend those meetings. It's not that they won't attend, it's that they can't attend. They're not allowed. And so that sends the message clearer than I ever could that these banks are very protective of their monetary policy. That's the real holy grail of what's going on. That's where the crimes really happen. That's where they soak us in interest, and they make sure there's always more money withdrawn out of the economy than is put into the economy. We're always operating at a loss. We're always operating at a shortage. We can't purchase what's produced, and therefore ideas like the Bradbury Pound are kept safely at bay. We could have a similar thing here, some sort of greenback or other kind of monetary proposal to mirror the Bradbury Pound that you guys promote. But Janet Yellen showed her true colors, although she tried not to, when she was questioned about auditing and related matters.
Brilliant, Mark, thanks.
Well, those are very good points, Mark. Of course, we want to solve the situation with all the troubled areas in UK and the USA. We've got to deal with the corruption of the whole banking system, and an issue of a new greenback dollar, so money issued by the American government for its people as credit. Here it would be the Bradbury Pound. If we took these simple steps, this would be stripping the power away from these unelected bankers, and we'd be well on the way. But of course, it's not just the bankers per se. We've also got them operating in secretive movements.
Yeah, and I actually had Mark on Friday's Liberty Tactics, and we were discussing Bilderberg, and we're on the hunt for where it's going to be, aren't we, Mark? And have you got any more feelers since Friday? Have you had any more information comes out on where it could possibly be?
Nothing concrete yet. I have strong suspicions about Holland because they first met there in 1954, exactly 60 years ago, for their first meeting. Something just tells me, and a few sources subtly indicate, that they may go back to the original scene of the crime. not the original Hotel de Bilderberg, which gave them their name. That's probably, maybe they've torn that down. Maybe it's too small of a venue. Maybe it was bought out by Holiday Inn or something. And there's so much conglomerations in hotels. That's kind of a humorous point. But that's one suspicion. Maybe it's a little more than a suspicion, but it's a little less than a hard fact. But certainly things are starting to heat up for both Bilderberg and what's come to be known as Googleberg. And that is the relatively new cooperation and collaboration of these tech giants like Google intermingling with Bilderberg, bringing in young blood, bringing in tech-savvy ideas, which relates to surveillance, of course. And these are the developments that American Free Press and I are watching right now, and there'll be a lot more in the coming days, so I'll keep you posted.
Mark, we've just called up your American Free Press Bilderberg Hunt article, so that's on screen, and it's mentioning there Sweden's Free Party, the first to formally oppose the annual meeting of top kleptocrats.
Before you just go on to that story, Mark, can I just ask, do we think the Googleberg for such is obviously going to be before, it's usually the week before the actual Bilderberg conference. Is it likely it's going to be in the same place as where the Bilderberg is, like it was last year? Because as we say, we were all at Watford last year, and a few days before we arrived, the Google conference was in place at the Grove. So will the Googleberg conference, do you think, be in exactly the same place?
I strongly suspect it will. Birds of a feather flock together. These guys that conduct these world power moves and do this kind of networking are, in a way, tragically predictable. Although you don't know exactly where they'll be, you pretty much know how they'll operate. And so I think that as night follows day, I believe they'll meet, if not in the exact same place as last year, which of course was the Grove Hotel in Watford, they'll be at least in close proximity. Of course, they have the technology to communicate anywhere in the world through, interactive video and whatnot, just like we are now. But I think that the way they operate and the way they behave, I think the answer is virtually certain on that one.
Thanks for that. Well, we're going to move on a little bit because the
running behind.
Clock's ticking. We've just got a couple of articles here showing that we've got this massive propaganda exercise going on in UK over the European Union, and we've got little articles for it. This is all, of course, aimed at Scotland at the moment. So here we are saying that a blacksmith shop run by 3 generations of the same family could be forced to close by new EU rules. Well, this is a gross understatement, because we know that thousands and thousands of businesses have been put out of business by EU rules, hundreds of thousands of rules to be precise. We've got this one here, Ed Miliband. Well, he's saying categorically that he's just not going to give the British people a referendum on the subject of the EU. Miliband is absolutely for the European supranational state. No doubt about that. He's also declared his loyalty to Israel and Zionism, so quite where his allegiance lies, I don't know. But it's being thrown in our faces now that if the Tory vote gets split and we end up with this man creeping into power, of course, he was brought up as a Marxist, and he's going to be fully behind the European Union. And we've got more pretty unpleasant stuff happening at home. So the Guardian here reporting that funding is being stripped away from mental health. We haven't got the money to run hospitals and mental health, so they're going to cut money to the mental health, and this has brought quite a lot of criticism. But we thought it interesting that, of course, in the background we've got the so-called ex-communist David Nicholson, the man who presided over the deaths of tens of thousands of people in Britain's NHS and Mid-Staffordshire hospital scandal. And he said while NHS Chief Executive Sir David Nicholson last week acknowledged the criticism of the way the decision over the funding was reached, he made it clear it would not be reviewed because acute hospitals needed the money to hire more nurses. So this is the man who's been working with his team to destroy the NHS. He's been sacking the experienced nursing staff, and having got that programme underway, we now use that as an excuse to withdraw money from mental health.
Disgusting. Can I just say, yes, I did say Googleberg. It's a Google conference, which is before Bilderberg. So, yeah, not a new word.
Yes, the concept. A bit more here from the BBC on the NHS about the closing of hospitals.
OK, so this comes back to the power just given to one man. This actually scares me, especially when it's people's lives in his hand. Jeremy Hunt has been given powers after MPs voted 297 to 239 to back changes that would let Mr Hunt close hospitals at his say-so, regardless of whether or not they're performing well. According to the Mirror, this isn't the Mirror article. We've got the Mirror
I can give you the Mirror article. We're prepared.
There we go. According to this Mirror article, Mr Hunt rushed through laws after the courts ruled his decision to downgrade Lewisham Hospital was after the courts ruled that his decision to downgrade the Lewisham Hospital was actually illegal. Shadow Health Secretary has come out and said hospital closures should be determined by clinical, not financial reasons.
So if I just jump back to the other one, the analysis here by Adam Brimlow, health correspondent BBC. Notice what he starts off doing. This is the bit I've highlighted. Change is notoriously difficult. So the BBC article immediately starts by promoting what the government is trying to do, which is to change the NHS, and then he reports, well, he gives a balanced both side argument, but what is happening is exactly what you've said, is that individuals are being given unbelievable power over life and death.
Exactly.
It's incredible. And we'll call this one up on screen as well. Mark, this is your American Free Press article on killer hospitals. So we see the same attack on healthcare that we're seeing here in the UK is also happening in America.
Yeah, from many angles. I'll just briefly note that one of the problems, of course, as the article is mainly about, is that in the U.S., across the U.S., they have a policy of simply not making sure hospitals are sanitary institutions anymore. We have MRSA and other very deadly bacteria getting loose, hospital staff, sometimes understaffed, but a lot of incompetence, a lot of bad policies, a lot of cost cutting and shoving things under the rug, which is resulting in people going into hospitals for relatively routine surgeries and coming out on the slab dead because these hospitals are rampant with deadly bacteria for monetary and bureaucratic and various reasons, some of it just plain laziness. These hospitals are not being cleaned up. Easily available technologies are not being used to keep these pathogens at bay, to prevent people from getting staph infections when they're in for surgery. And so people are dying in droves. So now in the United States, going to a hospital and catching a staph infection is the fourth leading cause of death, the fourth leading cause of preventable death, that is, in the U.S. So you can go in for kidney surgery or something else. The surgery itself will go fine. You'll die of one of these staph infections, and that's the fourth leading cause of death in the country. Wow. An amazing thing. But on top of that, we have the whole Obamacare thing. The question being, will it destroy the long-term medical coverage system here known as Medicare? What's Obamacare going to do to Medicare? Is it going to destroy it? Is it going to replace it? These are big questions. The problems here are maybe of a slightly different nature than that of the UK with regards to the healthcare system, but there's a lot of places where the two systems converge in their corruption.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We're both suffering the same malaise, and of course, people who've got trouble looking after themselves and on benefits also got problems.
Indeed, they do.
DWP here.
Yeah, I mean, we reported a while back the job centres came out and said they weren't actually sending people to food banks on the orders of the Department of Work and Pensions, and ministers claim charity support has no place in our welfare system. And ministers have also repeatedly come out and said that job centres do not refer them to food banks or issue vouchers, and we've covered that. Well, it looks like our ministers have been telling porky pies after documents were obtained under a Freedom of Information request, and they showed that basically they are sending people to the food banks, and the documents showed that each job centre is told to write down how many people have been sent to food banks on a slip record sheet, even though Department of Work and Pensions has said food banks are not part of the government policy. The latest statistics from the Trussell Trust, which oversees a network of more than 400 food banks in the UK, showed 614,000 adults and children received food parcels from its food banks in the first 9 months of 2013 and 14, compared to 350,000 for the entire 2012-2013 period.
Yeah.
So
politicians
they're at it again.
lying.
Amazing,
Politicians
isn't it?
lying couldn't possibly be, could it? Well, it could.
We've got G4S now, I think, Mike.
Yes. So basically, G4S has apparently been hit by the fact that it was proven to be a fraudulent company, or at least running some of its contracts in a fraudulent manner, and its profits are down 85% to £56 million, a mere £56 million. Apparently, the government ban on G4S being awarded contracts is still in place until they can convince the government that the fraudulent activity within its organisation is gone, but they haven't succeeded in doing that yet, and talks with government continue. So that's been the main reason for the problem. In fact, they had a 2.8% rise in the underlying operating profit, as the Guardian describes it here. And that's mainly due to revenues coming from Europe and the United States. So G4S continuing to do very well globally, despite the fact that they've been caught in this fairly huge fraud involving the British government.
Well, if they're a fraudulent company, it seems to me they're ideal to work with our criminal and fraudulent MPs, Mike. So we've got a great collaboration there.
Well, indeed.
And just the company to take over from the police.
Oh dear, a 12-year serving member of the Met Police was yesterday spared jail after a video was released of him punching a female shoplifter numerous times in the head. The video I found was quite disturbing, and if people do want to have a look, they can go and have a look at it on the Telegraph website. But it shows PC James Kiddie punching this woman repeated times in the face and head, and he ended up with just community service and the sack, and he said he lashed out because the woman bit him on the thumb and then claimed she had AIDS.
So in the video you can watch him grab her by the hair and pull her out of a chair. We're going to say this is a classic example of a police officer who's been desensitised, and in the Ian Crane report we have run 3 programmes talking about what's happening with police training and why we're now seeing police constables starting to behave in this very brutal way. So we can regard a lot of them as victims. Whether it's the case with PC Kiddie, we don't know, but horrific video. And it's not likely to be shown on the BBC. And we've got an article here from the Mirror, which is Liz Kershaw.
She's a DJ. She's
used to be a DJ. Has started to open up on the true story of BBC groping Jimmy Savile and a suicide tragedy. That was a colleague she tried to help. But basically, in part of the article here, she's really saying the sort of thing that went on. She said she'd been routinely groped by a colleague while talking on air. He'd stuck his hands up my jumper to put me off my stride by fondling my breasts. So this woman is not messing around in what she's saying. And of course, former BBC director George Entwistle, we've still not got to the bottom of what's been happening in the BBC. Good news on the way? Well, maybe, because the Telegraph's suggesting we might lose some programmes.
Yeah, so the BBC are trying to scare people into paying their TV licences by threatening to shut CBeebies channel, a channel that many parents unfortunately plunk their children in front of for the majority of the day, and they're targeting the children, and the BBC in fact say sorry, I've lost my train of thought here. Say that raising James Parnell, the BBC Strategy and Digital Director, says that if ministers succeed in making a non-payment of licence fee a civil offence, it will be a huge risk and lead to more people not paying. This would potentially mean a loss of 200 million, along with the CBeebies and CBBC channel. Right. So let's just hope that they do shut these channels down.
Just say it's not all bad news, because BBC Children's Channel and BBC could close. Well, what do we think about that? We think it's great news for children, great news for parents, and great news for our minds. So anybody who feels they can help the BBC on their way
by not paying their TV license.
By not paying their TV licence, of course, have a look at TV licence goons on YouTube channel. Yeah. I'm looking at the time. I think we're going to have to just skip. Any last comments from you, Mark? Sorry. Have we lost him?
Well, I think that we've outlined some very important issues today. We got to really watch Ukraine closely, with the machinations of the EU and NATO being on full tilt. But we can only hope that our programming gets more viewership as the BBC's deservedly goes down.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay. Well, final comment from us, and we're constantly putting this one up, of course. Campaigner Robert Greene, his only crime to be speaking out for justice of abuse victim Holly Gregg and other children who are being abused, remains in prison in Perth. He's been held since the 13th of February. So this is the state of Britain: fraud, corruption, and people who try and do the right thing put in prison. Can we do something about it? Of course. The start is to get people aware of what's actually going on, and then we've got to get some decent people into Westminster to deal with the bankers.
Can I just remind everybody about Westminster next Wednesday, Budget Day, 11:30, College Green, and there is a Bradbury Pound Facebook page, and from now until next week we're going to be putting little daily updates on how preparations are going for our nice friendly meet-up at College Green on Budget Day. So,
brilliant.
Thank you.
Well, thanks very much for joining us. Thank you, Mark, and we'll be back same time tomorrow.
Bye.
Bye-bye.